record. Welcome, friends, and good morning, and thank you for joining this webinar on creating or reinvigorating your legacy society. The pandemic has been a hard time for a lot of congregations to engage the work of planned giving because so much of it is person to person, face to face. And so as we start to reopen and feel like we can gather again in small groups and in homes, we thought it would be timely to have this reintroduction to the work of how we create a planned giving society. So thank you for joining. My name is Davey Gerhard, and I am the Executive Director of TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. In the rest of my life, I also am the canon for Stewardship, Development, and Planned Giving for the Episcopal Diocese of California, located here in San Francisco. So I have a little bit of experience both in teaching and in implementing planned giving in congregations, and I'm really excited to see what we do today. Joining me is my wonderful board member, friend, and colleague, Amanda Kiernan Martin, and I will allow her to introduce herself and tell you a little bit about who she is.
Thank you, Davey. Good morning, everyone. As Davey said, I'm Amanda Kiernan Martin, and I am the Executive Director for Mills Peninsula Hospital Foundation, which is for Mills Peninsula Medical Center in Burlingame, California, just south of the city. And I have, before becoming an Executive Director, I spent 10 years in the field of planned giving at universities and for the Diocese of California. So Davey and I have some very good history of working on these gifts together, and we're happy to share with you some of the tricks of the trade we've learned and also delve into the specifics.
Well, welcome, and thank you for joining me, Amanda. It's always good to partner with you.
You as well, Davey.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to move in through our slide presentation and get us started on today's material. So there are a few learning objectives for today. At the beginning, we will talk about how to create and grow your congregation's legacy society. This is really how do you begin the ministry of planned giving in your congregation, why you might want to do that, and some starting points on how you might begin this work. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then Amanda, our planned giving even better expert, is going to walk us through the most common planned giving vehicles so that you all have an overview of how some planned gifts can be structured and what the benefits are to the donor and to the institution or congregation that benefits it. And most importantly, we want to make sure that all of your questions get asked and answered today. So again, don't be shy. Use the chat button or the raise hand function and make sure that you get your questions asked today, because we really want to see this work flourish in your congregation. We begin with a little disclaimer, which is just to remind you all that we are not providing legal, tax, investment, or other professional advice in this. This is an overview of planned giving. And so when we talk a bit about the different kinds of vehicles and the tax benefits and reasons behind them, we are not assuming the position of giving you legal advice. This is just a place and an overview. We will be pretty clear with you about the places that you might need to engage counsel. There are some things you can do on your own, some things that would be great to consult with an expert on, and some places where you absolutely need a lawyer to help you with this work. So we'll be clear about what those are, but just a reminder that we aren't those things. So how do we create and grow a legacy society? A legacy society, it forms the cornerstone of planned giving in your congregation. It's the container, the group of dedicated volunteers and clergy who pick up and carry on this work in a congregation or in an institution. We call it a legacy society. You might call it a planned giving council, or you might call it your planned giving program. Whatever you call it is up to you. But the piece of it that's really important, I think, is to have some folks who are designated in the congregation as the people to talk to about how you can and why you should make a planned gift in your congregation. So it's important because often that work falls to the side. We do so much other stuff in our congregations. Our annual stewardship drives, our clergy are busy with pastoral matters. And so sometimes planned giving falls to the bottom. So having a group of folks in your congregation that really can be ambassadors for this work is very important. Now, they don't have to know everything. They have to know enough. You have to know enough to be able to promote the programs, to talk about how and why, and maybe run some events in your congregation. A legacy society, it strengthens the bond between donors and their church. Having a group of people identified and then who can then broadcast this work, it helps potential donors and current donors feel connected to that ministry. So often, we'll be talking about this throughout the presentation today. So often we don't learn that people have made a gift to the church, a planned gift to the church, until after they're no longer with us, until after they're dead. And we understand that that's the way some people are in structuring their estate plans and perhaps their own personal modesty. But how much nicer would it be to know in their lifetime that they are planning to do this beautiful thing for the church? And that way we can celebrate the work that will be achieved, that we can celebrate them now. Some people are modest or shy about that. But that's really important. It also helps them feel rewarded now. Why wait to the eulogy to talk about all the great things that they are doing for the congregation? We can begin that work now and celebrate them as the saints they are, not just the saints that they will be. This is an important concept, I think, in how we structure a legacy society. It also promotes the participation. So part of the work of planned giving in a congregation is to recruit new gifts, help build that pipeline of potential donors. It takes a long time for people to be ready in their lives, in their personal preference, to be ready to sign on for a planned gift. Some people need multiple invitations into the process. And so your annual event or your quarterly announcement in the bulletin, or maybe if you tell some stories throughout the year of past planned gifts and future planned gifts and what they're doing and have done for the congregation, it helps to keep that work present in people's minds and not just let it be forgotten. So you, as the members of your congregation legacy society, have a really important role in holding this work up, in celebrating it as a ministry, and in recruiting new participants. If you can afford a cake, you can afford a planned giving program in your congregation. You can run an event at a coffee hour where you ask people to stay later and talk over the options. You can join in with other congregations that are doing planned giving work. I think it's really lovely when 2 or 3 congregations do something after a Sunday, maybe bring a speaker in from the diocese and offer a little program after church, or on a Saturday morning or on a Wednesday night, whenever people feel compelled to gather. That kind of work is really important. I want to talk about our responsibility. This is something that we don't learn in seminary as clergy, but is actually our responsibility to ask and to promote planned gifts and estate planning in our congregational ministry. This comes from your prayer book doesn't automatically open to this page. It's in the service for the Thanksgiving of a new child. And it reminds the clergy that it is our duty to teach and preach about how to prepare and provide for your family, and make sure that your will is up to date. That's really what it's saying there. Make sure you have a good will, make sure that it's up to date. You've just added a new member to your family. You might want to think about how you're going to provide for them and protect them. And also, it throws in at the end there, you might consider leaving a line or leaving a gift to the church and helping future ministry. So I want to talk about that for a moment. Talking about money in church is hard. I acknowledge that. As a professional, I do that all the time. And sometimes my palms sweat when I'm doing it because it's difficult work. We have so many places in our society that keep us from talking about faith and money. It's a myth, not a myth, it's actual practice that we don't like to have these conversations in polite society. But in fact, when we are in ministry, talking about our resources is the way we fund future ministry. It's the way we engage our work in the world. And it's one of the things that we have to understand is our responsibility to do. So, helping getting over our own complexities and fears about talking about money is a part of the ministry of planned giving. And then when we go into talking about money and death at the same time, clergy have a real block against that, right? Because that's really frightening conversation. You're deeply wading into pastoral territory there. And so being prepared for how to talk about that is one of the things that this little paragraph in our prayer book is trying to support us to do. Let's remember that it is, and when we assume the mantle of the church and we bring that with us, it's a beautiful conversation to have with people who deeply love and care for the work that their church is doing, to talk about how their gifts can go on after they live and continue blessing the church and the ministries. So here are a couple of steps that you might take if you haven't done this work in a while and you want to pick it up again, or if you're starting right from scratch. It is a great idea to start with a few small things that can build over time. The first and easiest is to add the language of planned giving, normalize the language of planned giving, and put it right on your annual pledge cards. Let people know that they have remembered your congregation in the estate, or that they would like information about planned giving. This is a little, if it only happens once a year, it's a little reminder. Oh yes, the church can use these gifts, so that the church is asking for this. Maybe I should consider this. As we're praying about the pledge that we're about to make each year in stewardship, it's a little annual reminder that this is another way that we might be able to use our gifts for the church. And so when those pledge cards come in, someone should hand off those names to the Legacy Society, to whoever in the Legacy Society is maintaining a list of names, or perhaps the clergy or whomever in your congregation might do that. Put a little checklist next, or a check mark next to this family's name. They're interested in it, or they have left the church in a will. Let's follow up with a conversation and make sure that we follow up with that conversation. I don't know about your church, but mine, we put a lot of information in the past on pledge cards that never gets used again. We ask all kinds of questions about ministries they might want to do, and really all we look at the end of the day is how much they pledged and what their name is and make sure that we can match that up in a list. And what a mistake that is, because if we're going to ask for the information, we should do something with it, and we should make certain that if somebody actually ticks that box, yes, they want information, or yes, they have made a gift and we don't know about it yet, follow up with them. They're saying, you can follow up with me. So let's take them up on that. It's a great idea for your legacy society or your volunteer group to draft a brochure. I call it an endowment fund brochure, but you can use that for anything that your planned giving would do. Current and future gifts, endowments, capital gifts, those are all kinds of things that planned gifts can fund over time. And however your brochure or your information sheet or whatever it is that you have describes that work, it's really good idea to help people understand what their gift will do. It's more than just adding to the endowment, which adds to the operating fund, but what does that unlock? What ministry does that make possible? One of the ways that I always think is important to do that is to remind people to take a look at the names at the bottom of the stained glass windows in their church, or the little plaques that appear from places, or even in the front of a hymnal when it says this hymnal was given by this person or whatever. We have planned gifts all over our congregations that have been happening for decades. In fact, it's likely that our very church was constructed in a single or a variety of planned gifts at the very beginning. A group of people said, this church needs to be in this town, in this neighborhood, at this place, and at this time. And so the legacy of planned gifts has begun most of the ministries in our places. So when people say, well, what would my planned gift do? Why does the church need my money? Why should I do this? It's really helpful to take a look at what's happened in the past. Who are the people that have made an impact on your church? In the Diocese of California, we have a congregation out in one of our suburbs, Fremont, and the church was built almost at the same time that the city was founded. And so when you go into the old chapel, they have an old chapel and a new chapel. When you go into the old chapel and take a look at the stained glass, the bottom, the names of the people who dedicated those windows, those family names, also appear in the street names in downtown Fremont. So it says to us, the city founders, the people who were important in this town, they built this church, they cared about this church. And I love drawing that distinction between our past and our present. This church is still standing, it still holds weekly services, it's still there to worship and glorify God. And it was built by the same people who settled the town and created the structure that we now know of as this town in the suburbs of San Francisco. So take a look at that. Help people understand that planned gifts have been a part of their congregation since its inception. Finally, while it might not be all of your potential donors who go to your website to find information about planned giving, but as those of us who are Gen X and those of us who are starting to think about planned gifts, we're used to looking on our websites for information. So start putting information about your legacy society or about planned giving on your website. A testimonial, a story of something that's happened because of a great planned gift, where they can go to get more information, a link, even an email address. Make sure you talk to Mary. She heads up our planned giving program, whatever it is. Put some information out there so that there is a digital way that people can encounter this information as well. More and more, we're going to be looking at younger and younger generations to begin this work of planned giving. It's not just something that we do in our retirement years. It's something that we can start still in our family raising years and in our income earning years. After you've done those initial steps, it's really helpful to really create this group of people. Maybe you have an honorary founders guild. Maybe you create a plaque and put it in the church. These are the people who started this work. You remember that this work is going on. And I say this because planned giving societies or legacy societies, they change over time, right? So the people who founded that work 10 years ago and were really excited about signing everybody up to make a planned gift, that work gets done, it's put away for a little bit, people retire, move on in ministry, perhaps leave, or perhaps pass on. And then that work doesn't necessarily get picked up again by the next generation of folks. So that legacy society needs a little succession plan. Hand that work off. Always bring in new people who can help you do that work. It's really clear when you look at sort of the lifespan of a congregation, when you see those gaps, when this work wasn't being done. It's times when the congregation might be struggling, or when maintenance had to be deferred because there wasn't enough fund in the budget to be able to take care of it. And that's because some of these gaps in planned giving happen where people weren't picking up that work and creating that pipeline. The pipeline from when a person makes a planned gift until that planned gift is received can be 10, 15, 20 years. So there are long periods of time that we are often thinking about. And so when we miss that work for a few years, we then see that lag later on. And it might be outliving you and your experience in the church. At some point, it will catch up and there will be some missing pieces in your church's budget. So let's not do that. Let's always make sure that we're promoting this work in our congregations. Get together, have a party, kick off this work, and remember to do that annually. Maybe your congregation or maybe your diocese does this work as well. In our diocese, we used to have an annual event. We haven't done that in the COVID years. We'll bring it back one day. We did an event for years where people would come to an evensong at the cathedral. They'd get their picture taken with the bishop. And that was people who were a part of any congregation's legacy society. They were all invited up to the cathedral once a year to have this reception and a lovely event where people would talk about it. It was seen as both a recognition of the current planned gifts, a celebration of some of the past, and maybe a place to introduce people to the work. You might bring along a friend, say, come get your picture taken with the bishop, come to a beautiful evensong at the cathedral, hear how this work gets done. So participate in this, create some excitement around it. There is lots of information that you can get about planned giving. I put a picture here of the man who is unable to join us today, Charles Clowen, who wrote much of the material that's on this list. He's been the planned giving officer in the Diocese of Maryland for more than 60 years. Bless his beautiful heart. And he was going to join us today, but he got into a car accident yesterday. And so he's not able to join us. He would have had great stories to tell. He's a real character. I will send you all a video of him, which he filmed at the outbreak of the pandemic in a cemetery in Maryland to tell people about why they should start making planned gifts. He takes his ministry very seriously. So I'll make sure I send that on to you when I send you the materials. You can find a lot of information on starting planned giving in your church from the Episcopal Church Foundation. They have some free information on their website and some very low cost brochures that you can buy. These are great starting places. There are also great books available, and we've listed a few of them here. You can do a book study as you begin this work or pick this work back up again. Get a group of people who really care about this and are excited to talk about it in your congregation. There's lots of information out there, and if you need more or if you need some tips on what might be best, just get in touch with us, and we're happy to sort of curate a list for you and help you pick up and take on this work. So how does gift planning fit into your congregation's income producing program? What is a planned gift? And we're going to talk later about the most common types of planned gifts. So this is to help us remember that income stream I was talking about. That gap when it's not there is really visible in a congregation. How do we see planned gifts as a real part of our budgets and a real part of our stewardship in church? Stewardship is everything that we do in our congregation to remember and to bring to bear our resources for ministry. It's managing all of the gifts that we've been given to accomplish the work, the ministry, and the mission of the church. And so our stewardship takes usually two big components. The annual campaign, you're likely now in your congregations in October and November doing the work of your stewardship campaigns. Those pledge cards, those stories and testimonials we tell about the operating budget and the mission, that's one of the ways that our churches make their annual budgets work. And then the other is planning for the future, those planned giving drives, that money that is guaranteed to come in to the church at some point, that points us toward the future. We can use some of that in our operating funds, although we hope that it's not all used in operating, that some of it goes into reserves and in endowments and things like that. But these are the ways that our church budgets get met. We're going to have to rely on this more and more as we move into the next thing that our church will become. We're at a place right now where our greatest generation and our oldest baby boomers are beginning to pass on. Maybe they have passed on. They're going to give to the succeeding generations and to the charities that they represent almost $30 trillion in the next 15 years. This is an enormous amount of money at play. And our nonprofits, our hospitals, our museums, our symphonies, our civic arts organizations, our schools, they are asking for planned gifts. Our churches really need to do this as well and make certain that our mature generation folks, our greatest generation, and our baby boomers are signed up for planned gifts and have a way to remember their church in their estate. This is a really important part, and it's going to be more and more important as we move into these next generations. Finally, I want to talk, before I move us back into the group to answer some questions, I want to talk a little bit about how our giving relates as we need it in church and how we build our budget and our whole church financials picture. This pyramid here, we look at the bottom of it are our annual gifts. Those renewed givers, those new givers, those visitors that come in and put something in the pledge and plate. Those first three tiers of our pyramid is where the church gets most of its operating income for the year. We rely on pledges. They usually take up the biggest part of the pie in how we earn our money. Of course, we know that we rent our offices and our building out for other things, or perhaps we have other income streams that are attached to our church ministry, but the bulk of it comes from people, and it comes from these first three tiers. That's our operating budget. The second two tiers, capital and special gifts, those are less frequently asked gifts. Those are the things that we do when we have a specific program that needs to be funded, or a capital campaign, a rebuilding campaign, something that we need to do. So we ask people to make gifts above and beyond their pledge and plate, special gifts or capital gifts, to do very specific programs. That could be funding a specific ministry, like a youth trip or a mission program. It could also be a capital campaign to improve the parish hall or to tackle deferred maintenance. Sometimes congregations use major or planned gifts to do some endowment raising. Let's do a whole campaign for the endowment. I've seen and worked with congregations that do that. It can be really helpful. Or creating a rector's housing fund or something like that, something that's going to be used for the future. That's those next two tiers of gifts, that capital and special giving. And then finally, the top of the pyramid, often some of our largest gifts come through bequests or annuities or other planned gifts. And those, we hope, go into future ministry, endowment, or vestry designated reserves, money that can be used for the future, or to create a little income stream into the budget through an endowment or in the draw on an endowment. So we try to use our legacy gifts for endowments and for future giving. We try not to push it down into our annual operating budget. It happens sometimes, and needs must. We understand that. If it's between using a bequest and closing the doors, we're going to use the bequest. But when we can put it into reserves and save it for a future generation, that next generation is so much better off because of the work that we did. You've got to ask, and that's the basic point in this whole first part of our section today, as we talk about why you want to begin or continue or reinvigorate this work in your congregation. It is doubly tragic when a person who's been a longtime member of a congregation dies and hasn't been asked and offered a chance to participate in the ongoing ministry of the church through a planned gift. And often it's because we were afraid to ask, or we thought, well, that person isn't really wealthy. What could they possibly give? And that's not the point. You can make the smallest planned gift and have it turn into something spectacular, even if it's just keeping the program going. But every planned gift is welcome. They don't have to be $1 million extension, new wings to the church, entirely funded endowment programs. They can be small gifts, because small gifts add up to other small gifts and create a sustainable ministry. So we've really got to take seriously our responsibility to invite every member of our church to participate in the Legacy Society, to make a planned gift, whatever size, whatever way. And we're going to talk as we go through the second half of this about what some of those models and ways are. But before we get to that, I want to stop sharing my screen, bring us in. I see we already have one question in the chat, and maybe you have other questions that you'd like to ask or answer. St. Christopher's, thank you, Mona, for reminding us that ECF, Episcopal Church Foundation, has given their materials widely and freely. They are just a really good resource in the church. They exist to help, and they even, it's one of the places where people can go to do planned gifts. They run endowments, You can do pooled investments through them. ECF is a really great starting point and sometimes a whole continuing point for your congregation to do this work. So thank you for that, Mona. Jean, you asked earlier that you have a legacy society. What's the optimum time to focus on legacy giving and initiate a legacy giving program in the program year? Oh, I love that question. Well, you know, we're just about to hit All Saints. And I think that I realize that comes at the time of year when we're also doing our stewardship, but what a moment to remember the work of all of our congregations and all of the people who have made ministry possible in a place. So I think All Saints is a really important time to at least highlight the ministry and remember, as we're remembering the people who have died through the year or the people who have participated in the life of the community, as we remember our own names and family members, that we also call to the front this ministry of planned giving. But I also agree that we don't want to necessarily confuse it with our stewardship, except Amanda and I saw some great examples in our diocesan ministry of congregations that would do a combined ask. You know, they would do a steward in one, if you're doing face-to-face stewardship, why not also say, and here's a planned giving information. Would you like to talk about planned giving? At least initiate the conversation so that as you're doing stewardship, it's a good reminder that there are other ways to participate and you don't have to close that deal. And in fact, you shouldn't ever rush to close a planned gift. You should take the time that it takes and answer the questions and make sure that that person is ready. But, you know, at least providing it within the stewardship campaign is great. But I think a nice spring campaign, you know, it calls to mind resurrection, and it calls to mind our responsibility to think about the next life of the church. I think a lovely Eastertide focus on planned giving is a nice way to remember that it's about renewal. It's not just about things that are past, it's about the future. And that's what our resurrection theology teaches us as well. So I think that's another good time, and that often gives it a nice separation from our stewardship. Again, in your congregation, you know best who your people are and how they interact. Amanda, how would you answer that question, or what would you think?
Well, you know, DB, I'm always a fan of year-round stewardship and year-round planned giving, because I like to look at an individual's giving as really a testament of their faith, and we see that in our annual giving. But if we look at planned giving, the term planned giving or estate giving in with annual giving, it really is more of an expression of just how the person supports the church overall. And so you support the church annually, you should also support the church in perpetuity. And so I like to change the terms also. If you're concerned about talking to somebody about their estate and you don't want to sound like you're asking, you know, an overly personal question, Davey and I have taken it to asking someone, you know, have you considered endowing your pledge? Or have you considered keeping your pledge going in perpetuity? As a way, you know, it tends to open up the conversation a little bit more. People can be reserved when we just ask about sort of an end of life gift. But I think that's a softer way to approach it. And it allows you to incorporate it into, you know, your year-round stewardship materials. But as Davey said, Easter is my personal favorite, and then All Saints is another great time. If you consider mentioning planned giving twice a year to your congregation, I'd say, and you commit to that every year, that would put you on a good path and a good cycle to increase your planned gifts. They say in the field of planned giving that it takes between 7 to 10 times for a person to hear about planned giving or about estate giving before they really consider making their own estate gift. So you know that you need to mention it cyclically for a few years in order to create that common comfortability and understanding with the terms. And as Davey mentioned earlier, I also think that, it's important that we're asking about planned gifts, but it's also important when we talk to people about stepping up to make a gift, that they really are living out their Christian values, right? They really are living out the practice that we preach, which is to say, I have done this and I'm leading by example. Come follow me. And because estate gifts are different than annual gifts, nobody needs to know the amount. Estate giving is a great equalizer because everybody can participate and it doesn't matter the amount. It's just yes or no. And so if you say yes, then you're allowed to join that, and you can demonstrate to the rest of the congregation that I'm standing up for this because I believe in it. And I've been a lifelong, parishioner here, or I really love this congregation and I want to see this congregation succeed, regardless of, my individual participation or not. And I think, as Davey mentioned, that brings our Christian values full circle.
Thanks, Amanda. What other questions are out there before we move into talking about specific planned gift vehicles and getting you comfortable with those? What questions do you have about legacy societies in general and how to run them, how to ask for money in church? What would you like to ask or talk about? More coffee. Well then, as you think of those questions, type them into the chat or raise your hand and ask. And we'll go on with planned giving vehicles from Amanda. And then we'll come back. We'll have another chance to ask and answer questions at the end of this. So Amanda, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Davey. Well, you heard a little bit of my introduction about, really why we should encourage our congregations and parishioners to leave a gift to either their diocese, to TENS, or to their individual congregation. It does make a significant impact. When I talk to people about estate giving, we focus so much on the annual givers, and the annual givers are like your checking account. They're the people that you have ins and outs constantly. It's replenishing itself, but you're also spending from it. I like to explain to people that estate giving is like your savings account. And it's important to know the amount that's in your savings account. So it's important for people to self-identify and tell us that they've left us an estate gift, because savings accounts, like estate gifts that contribute to them, really serve as a backbone and a foundation of the congregation. They allow you to have more flexibility in your checking account because your savings account is there. They also allow you to know what future funds you have. So if you're considering doing a big project, that you have those reserves. And then when times hit hard and your checking account isn't replenished as often as you'd like it to be, simply because, we're in another recession or a pandemic has hit and you're doing more outreach than you thought you would ever be doing, that savings account, those estate gifts really come into play. But once an estate gift matures, we often like to see it go into a congregation's, quasi-endowment, which means you don't just automatically put it into your checking account, you save it. And this offers a great level of stability for the congregation, but it also offers some benefits to parishioners. And I think that is the part that we don't always talk about, is that by leaving an estate gift, you can often lower your taxes at death if you're trying to transfer gifts to family or heirs. Some types of gifts provide tax savings during an individual's lifetime, including gifts that provide an income stream. If you're on a restricted income, some types of planned gifts can provide you with an income stream during your lifetime. And planned gifts allow you more flexibility in how you dispose of your assets. As we mentioned earlier, planned gifts are really, a cyclical part of our Christian life. And we try to explain that to people, not just because the congregation needs the funds and because we want this expression for the congregation, but we want this expression of faith for the individual. And most people don't think about their will as another expression of their life and of their values. But when you look at the charities that you give money to every year and the amount that you donate and the community organizations that you participate in, people see those as an expression of their faith and of their values. But your will is really one of your last expressions of faith and value, because it's a written document that serves as a testament to everyone who you leave behind about what you believed in. And so we try to tell parishioners, this is another opportunity for you to say, this congregation, this faith, this diocese, this is what I believed in. When your children and your grandchildren read your will, what will it say about you, and what will you be able to pass on to them in that one of those last crucial moments? So it serves both a financial need for the congregation, but it also serves as an important piece of our individual lives and the lives that we share with our friends and family. So the why is really, it's really the heavy hitter. And we hope that by hearing this, you're able to convey some of these meanings, both to both your congregations and also in some of your stewardship materials.
Great.
Next
Amanda,
slide.
we have a question from Evan,
Oh.
who asks, what sorts of restrictions should be imposed on the use of planned gifts? Should we place restrictions on them? For example, education or outreach, or should they solely be used to pay for future operating expenses? What's your feeling on restricted gifts, Amanda?
That's a great question, Evan. So I'm a recovering attorney, and in my former life, you will see some gifts that have been too heavily restricted, where it really prohibits the entity, the charity in this instance, the churches, from using the gift because they're overly restricted. You don't want a gift that only supports boys' schools or that only supports, horse and buggy maintenance. So you want to be careful when you ask for restricted gifts, but you also want to allow parishioners to say, I want to support this specific piece. So we ask that they consider that heavily. What I have found, and I really encourage congregations to do, is to take it to your vestry and to ask this question, as you have, about what will we like estate gifts to be used for, and talk about the parameters of that savings account. There are things known as pure endowments, which means it's restricted by the donor who gives it. So if I give you something and I say I want it used only for endowment, then that is restricted by law, that you cannot use it for something else. But vestries can create what's called a quasi-endowment, which says, we're going to choose as a vestry to place all of our estate gifts into a quasi-endowment, a half endowment, which isn't restricted by law, but we're going to treat it like an endowment anyway, because we want that savings account, and we only want to spend 5% of it every year. And then you can set the parameters about what you use that quasi-endowment for. And the benefit there is that when you really put the thought and intention into creating that savings account, is that you don't spend it all the time. If it makes more than you spend, than your annual percentage, then it's reinvested. And so you have that chance to have a maturing, growing, stabilized account. Then you get to use that 5%, which is the traditional endowment draw. You get to use up to the 5% and take that over to, say, use for operating expenses, to put into your annual budget and whatnot. So you get a little bit of the best of both worlds. You can use the spinoff from the endowment for everyday operating expenses, and you can use your quasi endowment and treat it like a savings account, and then put parameters around it to say, we're only going to use this with vestry approval for, capital purchases, for starting new programs. And it gives your vestry, I think, more buy-in, and it gives the congregation more buy-in. When you show that you've put this thought into creating the fund, it demystifies planned giving a little bit, to say, oh, my vestry's thought about this, and we've put some real thought into it. And you can create a document that says this is what it'll be spent on and this is what it won't. And it gives more value to individuals than knowing, and I think more comfort. In congregations where we've seen them set up these funds or put parameters around how estate gifts will give, it provides that vote of confidence. And often you'll see the planned gifts increase in a congregation once the congregation starts talking about it more and really looking at it, not just from an asking perspective, but from how it will be used.
Thanks, Amanda. That's a great question, Evan, and a great answer, Amanda. Having a gift acceptance policy is a really important thing for a vestry to do. And it's a great conversation to have at the leadership level. What are the kinds of gifts we won't accept? What are the kinds of, and there are gifts that sometimes you have to say no to if they're overly restricted or if they're too complicated. There might be things that are way out of your league and you're just like, eh. So we have a sample gift acceptance policy among the resources in our resource library. You're welcome to take that, adapt it, change it. I bet that your diocese has a gift acceptance policy as well. And those are ways that you can set, and you can always change a gift acceptance policy, right? So it's not like it's written in stone. So there are ways that your vestry can start to approach that place of how do we restrict, what do we think about restricting, what won't we restrict? So take a look at that too.
Okay, so I'm going to go over just some of the basics of planned giving so that you have a better understanding of these gifts and how they can be used. Planned giving as a term is a little complicated. It's not, we've started to change it in the planned giving field to legacy strategies or to estate strategies, something that's a bit more descriptive. Planned giving, while it does mean that they're deferred planned gifts, is hard for people to understand sometimes. So when you use the language in your stewardship materials, we often, encourage you to say, have you thought about estate giving? Have you left us a gift in your will or trust? So that people can understand what it means a little bit clearer up front. Okay, so let's review the types of planned gifts. The simplest planned gift out there is a bequest. And surprisingly, bequests still account for 80 to 85% of all planned gifts. And a bequest is just a simple gift from your will or trust. If you have an existing will or trust, it's very easy to make a codicil or an amendment to include your parish into your will. It's not very costly. Often it's a few sentences, maybe 3 or 4, that identifies the congregation and talks about the amount or the percentage that you would like to leave, and identifies their tax identification number. I will stress that you want to ask your parishioners to include your tax identification number, as there are a lot of St. John's out there and a lot of St. Bede's. You can end up, even in one diocese, even if you name the state, you can end up with several. So we do ask them to be more specific, include your address or include your tax identification number. Last, I want to.
Sorry.
I was just going to say that the other thing you want to talk to people about is when they leave a bequest, they can do it one of 2 ways. They can either do a percentage, so I give you 5% of my estate, or they can do it as a fixed dollar amount. We encourage people to do a percentage because as a person's life and their value of their estate fluctuates at end of life, they're not always going to think to go back and amend their trust documents. Say you end up using a lot of funds at the end of life to pay for healthcare, and so the value of your estate is much lower than you expected. If you leave a fixed dollar amount, the fixed dollars take priority, and they have to be paid out at that dollar value. And so if I give you $10,000 and I only have $20,000 in my estate, that $10,000 has to be paid. Versus if I leave it as a 5% value, then the gift fluctuates accordingly with your intentions. So if you're trying to give 40% to your children, you leave 10% to the church. You keep those amounts that you had originally intended. So it's just a note to think about if anybody ever asks. Okay, next slide. So while bequests are the easiest gift, there are several other easy gifts, and I would honestly argue that retirement accounts are almost easier than bequests, because for a retirement account, you don't even need an attorney to help you leave a percentage of a retirement account. To do a bequest, you'll need the codicil or amendment, so you'll send that small paragraph over to your attorney and ask to have it included. For a retirement account, a lot of times you can log on to your own administrative website, either through Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, any of those, and change your beneficiaries, and you simply submit a beneficiary form. So you can do this with traditional IRAs. You can do it with your 401k, you can do it with your employer 403b accounts, your KEO accounts for self-employed. So any of the traditional retirement accounts you have, you can easily make the church a beneficiary, and you don't have to make them a whole beneficiary. You can leave them as a partial beneficiary or even as a contingent beneficiary if they like to give most of it away to other individuals, but they want to put you in as a second. That's also possible and encouraged, as again, life fluctuates and we don't always know what will happen at the end. The other reason why leaving a retirement account is beneficial is because if you exceed the estate tax minimum, you can save on taxes by giving some of your retirement account away to a nonprofit, thereby lowering your overall taxable estate. The other thing we want people to remember with retirement accounts is that pesky RMD, the required minimum distribution that takes effect after you reach 72. Was 70 and a half prior to 2020, and now after 2020 it is age 72. The benefit here is that those can be rolled over directly to your congregation from your administrator, or if you have an IRA, or if you have the checkbook for your IRA, you can write the check and it goes directly to the congregation. The benefit of this is it bypasses you, so you don't have to include it into your ordinary income, and it goes to the congregation tax-free, and the congregation receives it. So really a great strategy when you're talking about advertising, stewarding these planned gifts, is simply taking a look at your congregation and identifying people over 72, and perhaps holding one of those coffee hours to say, what are you doing with your required minimum distribution? It's a great opportunity for people to think about it. Additionally, people think of RMDs as one or none, and that's not the case. Your required minimum distribution, say it's 50,000 a year. It's not you have to take all 50,000 or you have to give all 50,000 away. If you can account for 30,000 of that in your income without it affecting your tax structure, you can give away part of your required minimum distribution as well. So you can give away that 20,000 and keep the 50,000. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can split your RMD up as long as you are taking the entire RMD. So again, ask for this gift. It's a really easy one, and anybody in your congregation over 72, or probably even you have a fair number who had to start taking it prior to 2020, ask them what they're doing with their required minimum distribution. The other thing that has gained a lot of popularity in the last 10 to 15 years are what's known as donor-advised funds. Now, congregations don't offer donor-advised funds. These are separate charitable funds that are set up almost like a private foundation, but they're set up with community foundations like ECF, Episcopal Church Foundation. You can set them up through any of the retirement providers as well, Schwab, Charitable, Vanguard, and your local community foundations. And the idea here is that you give a gift to the donor advised fund and you get a full charitable tax deduction for it. So unlike other income gifts where you only get a partial charitable tax deduction, for DAFs, you get the entire deduction, but you don't have to give it just to one entity. And this is really why donor advised funds have risen in popularity so quickly. So if I want to get the full charitable tax donation for my $10,000, but I don't want to give all $10,000 to one, or I'm not ready to, I haven't decided who I want to give my $10,000 to, you can send it to a donor advised fund, and then that donor advised fund will make the grants and distributions on your behalf, and it also allows it to grow over time because the donor advised fund is its own charitable institution. What you might not know is how many people in your congregation have donor advised funds. They might have set one up. The threshold to set up a donor advised fund is quite low as $2,500 at some of the Schwabs and Fidelities. I know Silicon Valley Community Foundation here in the Bay Area lets you set one up for $2,500. So the threshold isn't as high as it used to be. It used to be 10,000, 50,000. It's come down as they've risen in popularity. So it might be worth marketing to your congregation to ask people to make your congregation one of the beneficiaries of their donor advised funds, or to contribute in a tax year to their donor advised fund with the intention of them giving to you in your next capital campaign. These have low fees and are offered by the various institutions that we noted. So again, it's very, very low bar of entry for you as the congregation, because you are simply talking to people about giving from you, almost like their required minimum distribution from a separate fund that you don't have to maintain or account for. Next slide, Davey. Okay, so let's talk about let's do a small recap just on all the ways that we can give. So there are 3 different sections here. One is great taglines and ways to talk about this in your congregation. So did you know that you could give a gift to your church that costs you nothing during your lifetime? So a simple bequest will usually cost you nothing, especially if you've just drafted it up and have it included into your will as a codicil. Again, we want to remember specific amount versus percentage of your state. And you want to identify the church name and address for clarity purposes so that it doesn't go to a neighboring congregation. Next slide. Other gifts that cost you nothing during your lifetime are those making the congregation a beneficiary of your traditional IRAs, any of the self-employment plans, employer plans, 403Bs, 401Ks. Life insurance is another one. It's very similar to retirement accounts. You can just change the beneficiary of your life insurance. And again, you can make some accounts that are just pay on death accounts. In California, we have pay on death accounts, which are simply like a checking account that you hold at a bank. And you simply say, upon my death, I want this gift to go here. And so it completely excludes it from your estate, which is beneficial depending on where you are. So these are gifts that are very easy to make. They're very easy to advertise, and ones that you could talk about with your congregation now and won't cost parishioners anything. Next slide. Okay, second category. Did you know that gifts of stock can be more beneficial than giving cash? Now, we in the Bay Area know a lot about this. This is especially true of appreciated stock gifts. Now, this year, obviously, we're having very low returns, if any, in the market, but that can be beneficial for people too, given their current tax bracket. Some people might need a loss. So don't think that just because the stock market is doing poorly this year, that's a time to stop asking for stock gifts. Appreciated stock gifts, when they go up in value, are a fantastic way to give an increased amount to your congregation without having to pay that high tax bill, because you can deduct the full amount of your gift and you avoid the capital gains that you would have had to pay had you taken it out as cash and turned around and given it. So when you have appreciated stock, it's a fantastic way to increase the value of your gift at no cost to you other than the cost basis you originally had for it. It's also a fantastic time when you have losses on your stock as a way to get another deduction and loss for your taxable income. So it's something to think about when you ask people if they need to reduce their portfolio. Again, it provides an immediate gift to your church for the dollar value that they receive. And it's helpful, as I mentioned, for your annual tax planning when you want to look at it. So having another coffee hour that centers around tax planning, and maybe early in the year, come February, it's a great time to start talking to people about this so that they think about it when they do their taxes. People always want to ask at the end of the year, and it's great for end of year giving. But if you have a little tax refresher, maybe in February or March, when people are doing their taxes, that's usually when people see the benefit and value of doing a donation or using these strategies, so that when you come around to that second time of year when you're asking again, you can say, remember in February when we did that tax planning, and people have actually seen it in their seen it play out in their taxes. So it's great to do it twice, even if it's not for the same year. Okay, next slide. Here's another great tagline for income gifts. Did you know that you could make a gift to your church and receive an income that you cannot outlive? We do still have a lot of Depression era people in our congregations. And so there is a fear about outliving income and having to, reduce their value and their comfortability in life of the way and standard that they live. And with the fluctuations in the stock market, both in 2008 and now, we have people who have become very income sensitive. And that really means that, they don't enjoy the fluctuations in income that can come from solely having invested funds. There's a great solution to this called a charitable gift annuity. And a charitable gift annuity is one of the income gifts that you can set up that does not fluctuate and a donor cannot outlive. And so it's a great way to give somebody stable income during their lifetime. They get a partial tax deduction for it, and it's irrevocable. So once it's set up, the congregation knows that they will receive some benefit at the end of it. Okay, next slide. Another way to talk about these income gifts, of which there are several types for it. I see a question that's popped up: who administers the benefits of those gifts? You would want to go through, again, a charitable community foundation or like an ECF provider. You can get your own license to administer charitable gift annuities, but we in the Diocese of California have our own license that we then allow the congregations to use. So through the diocese, they can set it up. There are several companies you can work with, most of the big banks, State Street, Caspic. There are large banks that administer these entire nonprofit portfolio slew of options. And so they're not that hard to find, but if you're looking for a simple solution that costs you no money, I would say look at ECF or look at community foundations as your first stop. Okay, so just to review some of the basics of income gifts, the older the donor gets, the more beneficial an income gift becomes because the rate of return increases. So you would like to, for most charitable gift annuities, there's a minimum age of 55, but as you get higher, your return rate is going to get higher. Up into the 90s, it can get almost to 11%. And so it's a guaranteed income stream with a high yield. Some organizations at the Diocese of California, our minimum to start a charitable gift annuity is $10,000. I know ECF, for example, has a lower minimum, which is $5,000. So while the yield on that won't be a great amount, it's a perfect entry for someone to see how it works with a low dollar value. They're very easy to establish. A charitable gift annuity is just a simple 1 to 2 page contract between you and the donor. So they're not separate legal entities. They're not like trusts where you have to set up a separate holding account. Charitable gift annuities are just a contractual agreement. You do need a license because they are a version of insurance. So again, you'd want to go to an individual or organization that is licensed, Episcopal Church Foundations, Fidelity, Schwab, Charitable, and then any of your local community foundations. They usually all offer the same rate, and the rates are fairly low. So let's look at what a charitable gift annuity looks like, just so that you can see sort of how it works. Here we'll take a gift of property at $50,000. We'll give a sample age for Jonathan at 75. And you can see that if you were to transfer property at $50,000 and secure his charitable gift annuity contract, he would get an income tax deduction of roughly $20,000. So of that $50,000 that he gave, he gets a charitable income tax deduction of $20,000. If he's in the middle of the income tax bracket, it looks like he would save roughly around $6,000 on taxes he would have to pay. So then you take that principal, $50,000, and you set it up for one life. And you can set up charitable gift annuities for 2 lives. So my life and another. You want to keep charitable gift annuities between the age ranges. So a spousal relationship works well, or a brother and a sister relationship works well. What doesn't work well is a child and a parent, because the child's age won't qualify. So you need somebody who's in the same generational bracket as you. This one is set up for one life, so it's just going to pay Jonathan. With the $50,000 principal, he gets an annual annuity rate of almost 6% at 5.8%. That spins off an annuity for him every year of almost $3,000. So he'll get an annuity every year of $3,000. Charitable gift annuities are unique in that not all of the income comes to you as taxable income. Because you already paid taxes on the initial property value, you only pay taxes on a portion of the income that you receive. So of his $2,900 that he receives every year, tax-free of that, meaning it doesn't count in his ordinary income, is roughly $2,300. So his estimated one life payout on that $50,000 that he transferred is almost $39,000. So it's a fantastic opportunity to take money that you have, lock it into place exactly where it is, allow it to continue to grow and benefit the congregation, and then receive a steady income stream for the rest of your life. Here they look at the Episcopal charity afterwards with the amount that it's grown plus the amount that it's paid out, and you're looking at a potential gift of roughly $25,000 to the congregation. Here we did a 2-life charitable gift annuity. So you can see how it changes. If you want to do it for 2 lives, you'll notice that the annuity value goes down because you're stretching the annuity for a longer period of time. Here we have Jonathan, who's miraculously aged 2 years between our last presentation and now, and a spousal relationship with Ingrid, who is 73. Once you expand it over 2 lives, your annuity rate again has to live longer. Your annuity has to live longer, so your annuity rate will go down. Here it's gone down to 5%. So same example of transferring the property value of $50,000. We use that $50,000 principal to spin off a 5% annuity, and the annual annuity drops to $2,500, but it's not tied to one life. So it will pay out $2,500 for the remainder of 2 lives. Whomever outlives the other, it will pay both of them $2,500, not individually, pay them $2,500 for the remainder of their lives. So you see here that honestly, between the 2 lives, the payout rate has increased while the annuity is lower. In the last example for just Jonathan, we said it was $38,000 for his life. Here, we expect the estimated 2-life payout to be closer to $45,000. So it does stretch the annuity longer over the 2 lives. The benefit, again, partial tax-free amount passes to both of them for their lives. You do, because you're stretching it over two lives, you do get a lower initial charitable tax deduction. So we went down from the 20s to 16,000. So you get less to deduct up front, but you get a longer payment stream. And then again, we value it out with amount of distribution and amount of growth. The charity expects to receive roughly $25,000 at the termination of this gift annuity. Before we slide over to other income producing gifts, I want to answer just a few questions about charitable gift annuities that people often have. People say, well, what happens if it runs out? You know, if the rate of return isn't so high and they're contractually bound to pay me 5% every year, that is a risk that the institution absorbs. So if the charitable gift annuity runs out of money, it's a contractual agreement, meaning that it's not based off of the pot of money that you initially gave us. It means we're contractually bound to pay you that 5%. So if something happens in the market and the principal is lost for the charity, they do still pay out the percentage. Now, I can honestly say that in my 8 years of working this for the diocese, I think we only had 2 charitable gift annuities that ran dry out of the hundreds that we offered. So it's not a high risk. Otherwise, institutions like Schwab and Fidelity wouldn't be offering these. So we know that much. It's not a high risk, but what it does offer is it offers that level of comfort and stability to the individual making the gift, to know that this amount will be paid throughout the rest of my life, no matter what. So it can really provide that assurance to individuals who have those income sensitivities based on experiences in their past life. Okay, now we'll go to the next slide. Let's just briefly go over some of the other income gifts that are more complicated, but we'll touch on them. A charitable remainder trust, a CRT, functions roughly the same way as a charitable gift annuity, except that it is its own separate legal entity. So there are higher minimum contributions, usually at $100,000 or more, and it is its own separate legal entity, legal pot of money. So unlike a charitable gift annuity, a charitable trust can run dry, but it also has the ability to earn more than a charitable gift annuity does. The payout rates are often lower. They're capped between 5 and 7%, but because of the higher value that you need to start it and the potential to grow and the lesser restrictions on how it can be invested, it's a great opportunity if people are a little bit more risk takers, and so they really want to grow their property value for the church. It's a great option for people who also want to leave their gift to multiple generations. So with a charitable gift annuity, while you need to keep it in the same generation, a charitable remainder trust can pay out for your life plus 20 years after your life to a person of the next generation. So you can leave it to yourself and your kids for up to 20 years. So because of the higher value, there's a higher payout. It's a great way to think about strategic tax advantageous ways to transfer money to your children by leaving them an income stream rather than a lump sum. Pooled income funds are definitely not in vogue right now with the stock market, but it is good to know that they do still exist and they function very similarly to a charitable gift annuity, but they have a lower contribution amount, and there are restrictions and requirements by the state that provide how much the payout can be. You would again go to a Schwab, Fidelity, or Community Foundation to talk about a pooled income fund. As we mentioned earlier, life insurance is another fantastic, easy way to talk about people including a gift to their congregation. It's a simple change beneficiary form, and again, it can be a partial or contingent beneficiary. You can also donate the entire policy itself to your congregation, if not term insurance. So there's that option as well, though you want to usually have an understanding with the individuals if there's a premium that needs to be paid every year, that they continue to pay that.
This is a great one for, if you took out an insurance policy for your children when they were children and now they are adults, and they've moved on and they have their own children, maybe they don't need that $10,000 or $50,000 of coverage that you got when they were toddlers. So consider leaving that to the church or to your other charitable institutions. Life insurance policies, one of those things that sit around in drawers and we forget about until they get paid out. And then maybe your heirs don't need them as much as they did at another point in their lives.
There's also some institutions that say, talk to your congregation, talk to your parishioners about taking out a life insurance policy. And that sounds questionable, but if you look at somebody who gives you a high annual donation every year, there is an option for the congregation to have a life insurance policy on that individual where the individual pays the premium as a part of their annual contribution every year. This is a way for the congregation to get a large sum of money. And while I know that sounds a little bit more sticky, if you want to know how the massive universities are creating these enormous endowments, a large portion of it is coming through this creative life insurance strategy. It's being done there quite often. Okay, so no help needed to add a codicil to your existing will. Very easy to have it drafted and sent to your attorney. You can easily change the retirement account beneficiary for a retirement account or a life insurance policy. So these are very easy ways to talk to your congregation about making a planned gift without it seeming daunting. And then we do have gifts that continue to give to them during their lifetime and can assuage some of our parishioners' concerns. Charitable gift annuities or contributing to a pooled income fund will provide them with an income stream for the remainder of their life that cannot run out. They can again make a gift of their entire life insurance policy to the congregation. And we always want to remember that people can also make an easy bequest of real estate or other tangible property. And this is a great one for people who need their house through the end of their life, but don't have anyone to pass it on to. And I know that while we have a lot of buildings in the church, we also need a lot of rectories. So talking to your parishioners about someone who's interested in leaving their real estate or home to the congregation can be of great benefit. When to see a lawyer. You'll need to talk to a lawyer if you want to create or establish a new will or testament for your trust. So you will have to see a lawyer to draft an entirely new document. If you want to set up any kind of living trust, you'll need to see an attorney to have them draft your trust. And then if you want to establish some of the more complex gifts, such as a retained life estate, or if you want to set up a charitable remainder trust or one of the many other options of charitable trusts out there, of which there are many, you'll want to see an attorney to have that conversation and review it with them, and also with a financial planner to look at what options are best for your taxable estate. But many of the gifts we covered here today are very easy and don't require legal assistance. So lower barrier to entry for a lot of our parishioners.
All right, thank you, Amanda. I wanted to pull us back into, I know that we are almost out of time, but we have a little bit of time left to ask and answer any questions that you might have and to cover any last minute things. So if you got a question, please raise your hand in the reaction tab and we'll call on you. Amanda, that was amazing information. Thank you.
I'm trying to quickly scan the chat. I see there's like 6 or 7 in there. So I was trying to see if we have any questions that I could answer. Yeah, but a lot of best practices in here. I see people really chiming in to talk to each other about it.
I love that when you teach each other. Brian asks for best practices for newly created stewardship or legacy society to bring to the vestry. I think it's really helpful that you bring the examples of what planned gifts have done and can do and get your vestry excited about that and then empower you to be the vehicle or the way to promote that in your congregation. When the vestry buys into the potential of planned giving, they will then support you in the work, maybe release some funds for you to get some training or to invite a speaker. Also contact your diocese. Someone in your diocese likely is responsible for this work, and they might be able, so if you don't know who that is, your CFO, your canon to the ordinary, they might be able to direct you to the person who's the expert on staff, and they might be able to come and talk to your congregation about this. You don't have to do all the work of selling it to the vestry. Rely on some experts to come in. Also, if you have lawyers in your congregation that would be willing to do a wills workshop or something like that, or maybe not in your congregation, but friends to your congregation, you don't want to have a conflict of interest. But, set those kinds of relationships up too. Bring people in to talk about it.
Yeah, it's hard to think about when you think about legacy societies, what came first, the cart or the horse, which one goes. We really like to talk to the vestry about it, get them excited, as Davey mentioned, start looking at those gift acceptance policies, have the real thought conversation about what would we want to do with estate gifts, and create the language around that, because it creates the buzz in the congregation to start talking and thinking about it without having to ask for planned gifts. And so then once you have that basis and foundation formed, you'll find that it's easier to discuss with the congregation about this new update that the vestry would like to share, and have a lot of people who can speak intelligently on it.
Great. Any last questions before we depart for the rest of our Saturdays? Thank you for the thumbs up, Tony. And thank you all for participating this morning. Oh, Tony, you have a question. Come off mute and ask it. You're on mute, Tony, so you'll need to unmute yourself. You're getting there.
There we are.
There you go.
Okay. Is it possible to get the slides? So some of them, like the triangle, and there were others that are really important assets for talking about this.
Yeah, you bet. We'll send the slide deck and the video link to everyone after this presentation. I'll probably get to it later this afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. You'll also be able to find it in case you lose the email. It'll be on our website, and you can find it there in a few days. You all have been great, and thank you for your questions. Thanks for answering each other's questions in the text. That's really helpful too. Amanda and I are here at TENS to answer more questions that you might have forgotten to ask. So just get in touch with us. We're always happy to talk about this, to point you toward resources. This is a really important part of the stewardship of our congregations and our congregations' revenue streams. So we're here to support you in this work, and I really appreciate your time and attention. Amanda, lovely to hang out with you this morning. Thank you for being here.
You too, Davey. And I have to do one last plug for TENS. Please note that if you are interested in having these deep conversations with your congregation, that TENS does do in-depth consultations. And so we could really talk to your vestry about, how to set up some of these programs, if that's something that you think your congregation would be interested in.
Yep. We're happy to zoom in or whatever we can do to help you do your work. Thank you, friends. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and we'll talk to you very soon. Bye, friends.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.